absolutely tell. Last time I heard him give an update, he described himself as unfazed and talked about fighting members of the legislature in the hall.
A little unfiltered this time around.
Yes. The Dan we always needed is the Dan we're moving out. Yeah. Right. Very clearly about that. But still.
Those those emails.
Gee. You've been asked to also.
We were at the. It must be removed. No,
Oh, yeah, I got my wisdom.
it was removed. It's not quite ready yet.
It's not really?
Yeah,
Okay.
we still do the emergency declaration.
We'll be right.
Yep. Thanks for checking, Russ.
Wait, am I?
Okay, it's 6 p.m. Call the meeting to order. First of all, I want to mention that Jason is absent and excused. And we will begin with the land acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge that we gather on the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically Nooksack and Lummi tribes, who have lived in the Salish Sea Basin throughout the San Juan Islands and the North Cascades watershed from time immemorial. On behalf of everyone here, we want to express our deepest respect and gratitude for our Indigenous neighbors, the Nooksack and Lummi tribes, for their enduring care and protection of our shared lands and waterways. Next is Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Agenda, any changes to the agenda?
No.
Entertain a motion to approve the agenda as written.
Motion to approve agenda is written. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Go to the order.
Alrighty, I've got some photos for good of the order this week, so I'll share my screen.
Well, while you're getting that set up, I appreciate the nice audience here. It's always good to get a good audience, so thank you for coming.
Yeah. The FFA Ag Tech and Mechanics team placed second at the Burlington Edison FFA Career Development event a couple nights ago. It was one of the tougher contests that Mr. Reitmeyer has seen. Wyatt Freeman was high individual, Caden Mosher was 7th, Jace Goff was 20th. Students completed a general knowledge test, welding, small gas engine valve, and micrometer measuring, raptor cutting, bird's mouth, which I'll learn more about at some point, I think. Electrical wiring, bill of materials for construction project, and hydraulic parts ID and calculations. Also competing were Brady Bruland, Wyatt Zender, Joey Bedia, Brad Strom, Willow Cook, Logan Klein, Ben Brooks, Mikhail Fairbanks, and Brady Somerville. So there's some pictures from that event. Also, as y'all know, that 8 students joined Director Pfeiffer Hoyt and Mr. Frazier and I down to Olympia last week, where we got to meet with 4 of our legislators from the 40th and 42nd legislative districts. And we've got some pictures there. There's us with Representative Timmons and Rommel, and here's us with Senator Shoemake. And following that, the students engaged in a letter writing campaign, which was featured in the Cascadia Daily this week. So there's the picture of their work with Cascadia. So yeah, that's what I've got for good of the order this week.
Well, thank you very much. Yes,
Yeah.
I greatly enjoyed our trip to the Capitol. We have one of the students here tonight, and that was, I think, made an impact on our legislators. You know, I think they face a lot of tough decisions there all the time, weighing between one good and another good. A lot of we want to put our finger on the scale a little bit in the direction that we feel is most beneficial to our students. So I think they learn. I think all the students said they had never been to the state capitol before. And so it was, when we got into the rotunda, the first place we went, all the eyes went up to the top. It was quite a sight to see.
And they also wanted the baked potatoes because it was Potato Farmer Lobbyist Day. And so there's baked potato bars for all in the rotunda.
With the top. And don't forget the top.
Yeah.
But I'm, being half Scandinavian, potatoes is a big thing to me. Consent agenda. I entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Motion to approve consent agenda? Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Information from audience, anyone signed up? And I wanted to draw your attention on the consent agenda. We had a large donation from the Athletic Boosters Club of equipment for maintaining the field. So it's quite notable, and I we'll have to. I think that we hopefully have some extra cards. If not, we can sign some more. I'd like to give a card back to the Athletic Boosters Club on behalf of the board's appreciation.
Yeah.
We have signed up Natalie Chavez.
Hello, my name is Natalie Chavez. Thank you for listening to public comments this evening. At the last meeting, I mentioned the Mount Baker Health Equity Zone community meet and greet that was scheduled here on Saturday, February 15th, and how it was organized by the Chuckanut Health Foundation. It's unfortunate that Mount Baker is the first so-called health equity zone in Whatcom County that is being targeted by the Chuckanut Health Foundation, especially since this district is the first district after Bellingham School District to sell out their students to Big Pharma by signing a contract that allowed having a medical clinic located in a public school here. A medical clinic, SBHC, where Merck, who is the maker of the Gardasil HPV vaccine, is one of the funders of the School-Based Health Alliance. SBHCs aren't about helping rural communities. That's just how it's marketed. Numerous SBHCs, if not the majority, are in non-rural and very liberal communities, like Bellingham School District, who was the first district to sell out their students in more ways than one. And they even have a medical clinic, Unity Care, that is within walking distance of their high school and SBHC location. The Unity Care Clinic in Bellingham caters to low-income families, those on Medicaid, and on their clinic website under the link titled Medical, it states, quote, "We have a full range of primary medical services, including well child exams, immunizations," unquote. Those are the first two things listed. So Bellingham's SBHC was not due to Bellingham being located in a rural area and having accessibility issues to medical services. Far from it. This is about putting profits over people, profits for Big Pharma or Big Pharma, as some folks call it. SBHCs offer pressure, coerce, incentivize, and even reward students into receiving services that include HPV vaccines, among other vaccines, antidepressants, puberty hormone blockers, and reproductive services, all of which can be done without parental consent under the mature minor doctrine. I would like to bring your attention to one of the biggest vaccine lawsuits in history, which is very rare because of the vaccine liability shield that vaccine manufacturers have. The jury selection began last month in California for a historic Gardasil HPV vaccine trial against Merck. The trial began and was supposed to proceed for approximately 6 weeks, but unfortunately it was temporarily suspended until this September. The lawsuit, Robi, R-O-B-I, versus Merck, M-E-R-C-K, was filed by attorneys on behalf of Jennifer Robi, who was profoundly vaccine injured after receiving the Gardasil HPV vaccine and has been confined to a wheelchair since the age of 16. Jennifer was a high school athlete and honor student who was forced to drop out of school and be confined to a wheelchair after receiving the HPV Gardasil vaccine. Jennifer currently suffers continual uncontrolled neuromuscular contractions, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, POTS, and many other symptoms of systemic autoimmune dysregulation. She has been disabled for more than a decade. Merck's Gardasil HPV vaccine destroyed her life and devastated her family, and she's not the only one. There are many others like her who are vaccine injured after the Gardasil HPV vaccine. Over $70 million have already been paid out to Gardasil HPV vaccine injured individuals through the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. Jennifer was not satisfied with her VICP judgment, so she opted out and elected to file a lawsuit in civil court, which is allowed, but never done before, which is why this case is a historic case. I personally believe that Jennifer will be awarded over $50 million after the case is litigated in court by jury trial, which is much needed to set a precedent for all of the hundreds of lawsuits involving Merck's Gardasil vaccine. There are currently Gardasil lawsuits against Merck that are pending in state courts, and as of December 2024, there are over 200 Gardasil lawsuits pending in federal court. Jennifer's lawsuit accuses Merck of fraud, negligence, and concealing the likelihood and severity of adverse effects associated with its Gardasil HPV vaccine, and seeks damages for loss of income, medical and legal expenses, and other relief that the court deems appropriate. Merck's Gardasil HPV vaccine received fast-track approval from the FDA in 2006 after a brief 6-month approval process. Merck and its employees failed to disclose key information to the FDA, including the vaccine's safety and effectiveness data and any known adverse reactions to the drug. I encourage parents who think that their teenager may be Gardasil HPV vaccine injured to contact the Wisner-Baum law firm at wisnerbaum.com or call them at 855-948-5098. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Natalie. So Natalie's the only one signed out. Anyone else present would like to address the board? If not, next up is Mount Baker FFA, and I thank you for coming. And Nick, did you want to introduce the?
Introduce themselves.
Oh. And the advisor is welcome too.
Oh,
The
yes.
advisor can sit back there and just enjoy what he's
trying
been
not
able to do.
You're going to need to slide it up.
So my name is Kaylin Jewell. I'm a senior and I'm the reporter for our FFA, which means that I work with communication, so social media, marketing, and like situations like this.
I'm Gracelyn Zender. I'm also a senior and I am our FFA president.
So kind of what we're gonna go over in this is our livestock showing, our CDEs, which are career development events, community service, involvement, barn projects, and our FFA week.
So in the Mount Baker FFA, we have a large number of students who show animals throughout either the Puget Sound Junior Livestock Show and Sale or the Northwest Washington Fair. As you all know, we have the barn across the railroad tracks, which holds a lot of our animals. Last year, we had 2 lambs that were raised at the FFA barn, and we also have 5 sows currently. And we'll get more on the details of how many pigs are in there next. But our students take them to the shows, they sell them at the auction, and they can raise up to a profit about $1,000 just for a pig. They can get add-ons from local businesses, local community members. We've also, in the past couple of years, have done more chickens and rabbits. And we also have students that also show horses at the Northwest Washington Fair. And we have a wide variety of students that like to participate in livestock showing. And it's a good way to get their foot in the door for like building a savings and learning responsibility and how to take care of another living animal.
So our career development events include agriculture mechanics, employment skills, forestry environmental natural resources, agriculture education, and veterinary science. And parliamentary procedure. So kind of just to highlight some of the results that we've seen we took a team for our forestry to nationals, and they got 11th place. And that consisted of Merritt Kelly, Zach Zender, Mikkel Fairbanks, and Jace Goff. And then we got 2nd at trap shooting at districts, which is the highest we've ever gotten. 1st place at Linden Egg Mech, 1st place at Meridian Ferndale Egg Mech, 6th place at Vet Science at Mount Vernon, 4th place for employment skills at Cedar Crest, and that was Dylan Cowsbeak, and that's an individual event. And Raylyn Wooden, who is our vice president, got the Swine Entrepreneurship Proficiency Award.
And again, the AgMech team just got 2nd at their last competition, which Mr. Vergo said that it was one of the hardest competitions that Right Mare has seen since like the state competition. So
How does the individual employment skills work?
So it is a competition where a student or a contestant creates a resume, basically applies for an ag-related career and applies for a fake job where they make their resume, fill out applications, they do a thank you letter, a follow-up letter, an interview, phone call. It kind of prepares you. It basically takes you through the steps of going to actually get a job, but it's in the span of 2 hours instead of how 2 weeks. And so that's how Dylan actually is he's been doing it for the past couple of years, and he's placed really well, and he placed at state last year, and he was top interviewer in the state last year as well.
That's cool.
And he's our treasurer for our chapter.
And he's at districts tonight.
So some community service that we've done, you can see students holding up decorated pumpkins. Those are for the Spring Creek Retirement Home. We decorate pumpkins around Halloween, which doubles as our fall social. So it's a good time to kind of gather members of the chapter. And then we also, the pictures on the left and right at the bottom are us at the log show doing a cleanup. We do that in turn because they support our FFA a lot. They support students with scholarships, and that's where we host our FFA auction. So we like to give back that way too. In the middle is our fundraiser from last year's FFA week, where it was a Kiss the Pig competition. And whatever teacher got the most money in their jar in the office had to kiss a pig. You can't see, but that's Mr. Lewis in front of the entire school kissing a pig.
Is that why you retired?
Yeah, maybe.
I want to ask what the tarp's for.
That was a coach left. That was a coach left discussion.
Yeah, but this year we did a book drive, and it's still continuing on until the end of the week. So we have a book drive for we're donating them to the social action group up at St. Peter's Catholic Church, because we asked the schools and they said they already had a book drive. One of we gave books back to our community. I thought that was a good thing for our community.
So involvement kind of by the numbers is we have 83 members this year, which is 16% of our high school. So it's a little bit down compared to last year. But that's kind of as expected because we had to drop 8th grade due to some of the budget cut restrictions. So it's not that bad, compared to years past. It's kind of average, but yes, and that's a picture of us just at a monthly meeting last month. So
like I said, we have 5 sows at the barn. We've had 16 pigs born on site this year, with another litter due this week, the end of the week kind of. In total, we have 39 pigs in the barn, and over 20 students will use the barn this year, whether that's through raising the sows, raising their projects for fairs. We open up to all students so they all have an opportunity to be able to raise an animal and make a profit in some sort of way. We also last year received our $30,000 of our FFA Foundation grant to update our equipment in 2024. And we are still in the process of buying a large livestock scale. We have been able to buy many showing and fitting supplies and update those so that students have those available when it comes to showtime. We have had outdoor cow hutches and panels for outdoor sheep and goat pens, which were able to be put into use last year with 2 students raising their sheep at the barn. And we are still in the process, or we have bought an ultrasound machine so that they can do ultrasounds on the sows instead of hiring it out. Yeah.
Well,
And
good career skill too.
Yes.
And like Gracie said, with not having to hire out for things like ultrasound machines, it makes it so we're completely independent. We're one of very few schools in the county with a barn of our own. So it makes it so that we're completely self-sufficient in that realm.
I'd like to point out too, the barn was built with funds provided by our capital projects levy, which the voters supported specifically for those types of projects, as well as from state forest timber revenue. So it's thanks to the voters that you have such a nice facility. If you were too young to probably have remembered our old facility, but it was melting into the ground.
It was falling apart.
I have siblings that are
So this last week was our National FFA Week. And so you can see pictures of students at an egg career fair, which was Friday, and then that Monday was the tractor pull competition. So we also had a potato eating contest and
A opportunity for students to fill out their green hand and chapter degrees. Yeah. Green hand and chapter degrees. It's a degree that you can get through FFA.
Oh.
And so those are not pictured, but we had a lunchtime like little snack area, and we were able to have our members there that had already gotten their chapter degree and green hand degree to help sign the kids up and do all their applications and everything.
And you have to have your green hand and chapter degree to get your state degree, and you need that to fill out quite a few scholarships. So you have to kind of lead up to it across your time in FFA.
So the upcoming events we have are our Booster Club auction and dinner and auction on March 8th at 4:30 p.m. We have lots of auction. Sounds like we have lots of really good auction items actually. Like we normally do. We usually have a pretty good turnout. That's for Booster Club, which they give back to our FFA chapter. They're very generous with our FFA chapter, and they also provide a lot of scholarships for our students, which I know we all appreciate. Vet science, ag mechanics, sub-districts and districts are coming up, and there's sub-districts and districts for parliamentary procedure, employment skills, and agriculture education. That is happening sometime. Parliamentary procedure and agriculture education are happening in the middle of March. Employment skills, I believe, is tonight, where Dylan is tonight. And then state convention is happening May 7th through 11th at Wazoo again. So we have updates on our website and social media for more information. Or if you want to stay up to date on how everybody's doing in placing in all these events, we also have all those updates on our website and posted on social media. Yeah.
And kind of to go off of the Booster Club auction, our FFA students can receive $44,500, I believe, each year in scholarships, and that's one of the major ways that those are funded. And every single student in FFA gets affected by the money that we raise, whether it's each student that raises a market animal gets sponsored by our Booster Club, or if students need medications for their animals, that it can be funded through that. So they support every single one of our students. So that's why it's really important for us to have that auction.
Or even providing dinner for events that we have here. Like we host districts for our public speaking event, like parliamentary procedure and agriculture education and all of like the public speaking events. And our Booster Club does a really great job of providing dinner. They usually make home cooked meals. It's really nice.
So that's kind of all we have. So we'll open it up to questions now, if anyone has any.
Board members, questions or comments?
Well, I have been wondering this for a long time because and I don't know if you guys know, but I saw something about the forestry students went to Indianapolis or Indiana to do it. And then, so I was like thinking about it, like, what are the forestry competitions like? So like if you go to Indiana, I don't think they have the same kind of forest that we have here. So I was just trying to like figure out what happened.
I can speak to that. We've been back there like 14 times. We've won state. Indiana does have forests, actually quite a bit.
Okay.
And it's a lot more colorful than the ones around here because it's all deciduous trees. But we go to Morgan Monroe State Park or State Forest, which is about an hour and a half southwest of Indianapolis. There's 48 trees. We have to learn basically 36 new ones.
Okay.
Because they bring trees in from all around the nation.
So you have to adapt what you're learning to, from all over the nation. So you have to think about it.
Years ago I pushed because most of the trees were Midwest and East Coast. And so I pushed hard for years. And they get like pretty much an even number of trees from around the coast, southwest, southeast, northeast, northwest, and then Midwest. So they do a good job of getting in, but we just have far fewer trees than most other regions because a lot of them share the same types of trees, so it doesn't really count for us.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
then,
I don't know how that works.
yeah, the trees are part of it, but the crew's totally different. My kids use a clinometer and deep diameter tape to cruise, and back there, you can use it, but they recommend using tree sticks, like Biltmore sticks. Russ knows what I'm talking about, but yeah, so they're using sticks out in the woods, which is like ancient. But that's what they carry there. That's even the foresters, they don't even know how to use a clinometer except for determining slope. So.
Cool.
And you have some tree species in an arboretum here.
Yeah.
So how many different?
From nationals,
Yeah,
4.
4.
The rest died because they
Oh,
don't like
okay.
it here. And then we made, last year I made an arboretum for most of the state trees that are not easy for me to get because I'm getting kind of old and not willing to do as much hiking as I used to. So it's a little easier to access it. It only took me 25 years, 30 years to figure that out. So.
Right. Yeah. Thank you.
Congratulations on your success. It was like an awesome year. Thanks for being leaders in your organization. I think you guys are learning skills that are gonna really help you, whether it's work or college or whatever you do. So keep going.
Thank you.
Yeah, excellent business minded skills and public speaking skills. We've seen a standing pattern of that since coming to the FFA, and that's what we're doing. Hard work. I would love in one of our next school visits to be able to go out to the barn and maybe have a couple of FFA students with us to talk to us about, we actually see in person some of this really great stuff that we're doing.
When we schedule that CTE visit, can we head over?
Yeah, that's fun.
Perfect.
That would be incredibly amazing. Thank you.
But I've noticed over the years that the value that FFA brings to the high school in terms of creating a positive culture. I think the FFA program is one of the key reasons for that, and also Mount Baker graduates are noted for their work ethic, which I think FFA is a primary driver of that, and so I think that it's both a program that keeps you very engaged for 4 years, but it's one that gives you a lot to take with you and into the rest of your career and your life in general. So this is a great presentation. I think you good communication, and I think it helped us get the pictures of what it is you're doing, and so I thank you for well put together. So thank you for the presentation also.
Yeah, thank you guys.
We'll miss you guys next year.
You will.
Let me know if you're looking for a job.
I want to put a disclaimer out. I'm sorry, Caitlin and Gracie spent a lot of time, but they did it on Canva, and then I made the mistake of downloading it into a PowerPoint. So all that formatting was done. I was just like, oh no. So their social media skills were not because of them.
Well, digital media is part of career and technical education. Thanks. Next up, the board action items. Let's start with Mount Baker Resolution 24-25-4, signatories for bank account.
Yeah, so this one is some updates we've had to do since should have had a while ago. From Phil departing to me stepping in, just gotta get my signature on the bank account. So there you have it.
So any questions?
No.
If not, entertain a motion to approve resolution 24-25-4.
Motion to approve resolution 24-25-4. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Next up is Mount Baker Resolution 24-25-5, declaring an emergency.
Yeah, so I wrote to you all about this a couple weeks ago. You know, fortunately, a car drove through a school. And in my opinion, and with your approval, it meets the definition of an emergency, which allows us to waive competitive bidding processes and just move forward with a repair to make sure business continues as quickly as usual. Iger's been doing a lot of work as far as the creating of the contract and what the scope will look like, and we've been sharing it with our adjuster, and the adjuster seems to have no issues with it. So this would be to declare the emergency so we don't have to, so we can waive the bidding process.
Basically, the insurance payment will match up with the bill, so we're not out additional funds.
You got it.
On top of it.
Any further questions?
But the insurance adjuster felt that it was
Yeah.
a fair price.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I will point out that we will probably at our next meeting have assuming we approve this, have a contract for that work too. But this is the first step in being able to award that contract, so. Entertain a motion to approve resolution 24-25-5.
Motion to approve resolution 24-25-5.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Passed. And then study session, strategic planning, goal, teaching and learning.
Yeah, so this time I'll invite Bridget Rossman and Casey Knudsen. Casey works with the ESD 189, and he's been supporting our leadership team, our principals, and the cabinet this year, and some of our own professional development around UDL, or Universal Design for Learning, and how we can best support our teachers in Mount Baker with that work. So he's going to share a little bit about that work tonight, and we're just going to chime in as needed.
Yep.
And thank you both for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
It's exciting work, and it's exciting to be investing in the principal group and seeing how that is beginning to reach out into the schools. And that's something I think in our district, we maybe have missed a little bit of being able to do that. So this is really a nice fit in getting everybody aligned with the learning. And Casey's a great partner. I really appreciate the energy and the integrity and honesty that is brought to our group. Thank you. Yeah.
Share.
You should be able to share your screen. Maybe not.
When you have the green share button, is it giving you?
We're good now.
Okay.
Do I need my audio up?
Do you have any audio in there?
I do.
Okay. So make sure the share sound then.
Yeah, it's not allowing.
What is it down?
So that we have 2 MBLT meetings, Malt Baker Leadership Team meetings a month, and one of them is typically dedicated to professional development. We're not dealing with operations and management. We are building the knowledge and collegiality amongst the group. So it's pretty focused. It's a 90-minute power learning. And then in between those meetings, there's follow-up and conversations that are happening as well.
And that's what you're doing on Wednesdays? Yeah.
Yep, not every Wednesday.
Not every Wednesday.
Mhm. And so then kind of the trajectory is that we've been doing this learning and digesting, and coming up this next month, we'll come together again and we'll set a goal for the Mount Baker leadership team, so that there's really that investment and understanding as to what is being learned and why. So then we can begin building that out with the leadership teams that it's building. On the 14th, Casey was one of our presenters, and it was fantastic learning and excitement. Really positive feedback on that session. It also really helps support the work because it's the right work. Yeah, and so tonight you'll see some of that and understand it.
We go?
Your go.
All right.
There you go.
So just a little bit about me. That's actually supposed to be 26 and a half years. So primarily in this region, Stanwood Community School District as a teacher and administrator, LaConner as a level administrator, and then Burlington, Edison, and Anacortes as a district level administrator. I did hop over to Lake Chelan for a couple of years recently, and that was kind of fun because I'm originally from Okanagan. And then I spent 2 years as a national educational consultant, working primarily West Coast, but across the country, specifically on Universal Design for Learning and MTSS framework.
So then when a job opened back up locally at the EST, I was like, ooh, I would much rather do this work in the region where I have lots of friends and partnerships in place. So that's me. Okay. Bridget told me to pack a lot in here and talk slow because you guys are paid by the hour. No? Okay.
Bridget. Talking later. We'll just keep laughing.
Seriously, the daggers are coming. Yeah. I'll try. I do have a lot of information for you because you're doing a lot of good work, but I'll try to keep a fairly rapid pace for you. This is the essential question that's been driving our work with your leadership team. And the double word use is important there. So we've really been digging at how do we get better. So really trying to refine that process of not wasting our time, really trying to get down to the essentials on how do we improve teaching and learning for all kids. And your leadership team's amazing. They've really been leaning in. It's been a lot of fun. This is the kind of the learning arc for the year. We started out big picture, talking about MTSS and inclusion and integrated teaching, kind of set the foundation. I'm going to give you some of that today. And then we dug deeper into where are kids receiving their educational services? Are they part of a classroom community, part of a broader school community versus being isolated somewhere for their services? We tried to also have an activity related to each of our learning sessions so that they could dig deeper. So a ghost walk, they partnered with another school level administrator. And a ghost walk is when you go and you walk through the school and classrooms and you make assumptions, predictions about what's likely happening in that space based on the walls, based on the room arrangements. And they came back with some really good reflections and thoughts about that. So not just our learning time together, but doing some actionable thinking and applying after the fact. And that was on Bridget, really trying to leverage the learning that we're doing to move toward action. So let me jump in here on some stuff. That work? So this has been kind of the crux of getting better. We have to solve this problem. And it's this, that we have a student outcome problem. And that's the difference between what we want for all students to be true and what is actually happening, right? And if you have a student outcomes problem, it means that you have an adult performance problem. And that means that there is a difference between effective evidence-based practice and what's actually happening in practice. Historically, we like to stop right there and blame teachers. But there's actually a problem that precedes that. And it's that we're not providing the systemic support that teachers need. Sometimes they don't even know what that effective practice is supposed to be, let alone being provided with the support in order to deliver on that practice, right? So I like to say this: everyone has a student learning problem that requires a change in adult practice, that requires a systemic response. This is not a Mount Baker thing. This is an everybody thing, right? And so I always highlight that in red and say, like, this is the equation, right? This is the problem that we have to figure out how to solve. By the way, interrupt me at any point if you're like, I don't know about that.
Does adult intended to include parents, or is that just focused on educators?
Interesting you should say that. So for now, we're kind of focused on educators. Okay. But we know, and you'll see some data about this, that it's a partnership, right? It has to be a homeschool partnership for us to really get the outcomes that we want. And so at some point, you do have to start thinking about how you're supporting your families and increasing their capacity to support their children. We're more hyper-focused on the internal function. Right. Great question. Yeah. Okay, so digging into the system, right? So we take that model and we think, okay, what is the system? This is the Washington State multi-tiered system of support framework. And we have added to it at the ESD to make it a little bit more clear. The state model has a picture of Mount Rainier in the middle, and it's kind of missing the most important part of this thing, right? So when we talk about an integrated multi-tiered system of support, those three items in the middle, academic, social, emotional, and behavioral health, those are all needs that our kids are showing up with all of the time. And we're going to dig into some of the research and see that those things have to be integrated, and we have to provide overlapping support for all three of those things concurrently. The other place where we look at this as a system is knowing that these other features across the bottom have to be true. Like when we're solving the problems, we've got to work with teams of folks, including our broader community and parents as well. We have to make data-based decisions. So we're not winging it. We're actually looking at the data and making decisions about the kids that need us to be centering them, involving our students, our families, having a continuum of supports. So we want everybody to be a part of a classroom community where they're working on grade level proficiencies with their peers. And they also deserve to get what they need when they need it. And so that's where we talk about this continuum of supports. Yeah, I'm a part of that classroom community. And if I need a little bit more in this moment, we have a way to deliver that. And if I need a little bit more beyond that, a little more intensity, we have a way to deliver that. So it's really a pretty complex system. You've been working on this system for a couple of years. You had another consultant that came in and was supporting some work on trauma, which has provided a great foundation, and we've been kind of jumping off from there. Okay.
What's the difference between social, emotional, and behavioral health?
That's a great question. Can you hold that for a second?
Oh, yeah, you're probably gonna get to that.
I love,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right.
I am, absolutely. And I love that you're asking. Okay, so back to our problem, right? If we want to change outcomes for students, we have to change practice for adults. And we need to really lean into high yield practice. And high yield practice is basically practice that works. And that we start with practice that's proven to work somewhere else and apply it in our system. We have to apply it with what we call consistency and accuracy. If something works and it's proven to work somewhere else and you have to do it on a weekly basis, and we only do it once a month a year, then it's not a high yield practice anymore. And if we don't know how to do it well, not high yield practice anymore. So those two things are really, really important. It's individuals that deliver high yield practice. Individuals bring stuff to the table, right? So when we're asking people to change their practice, sometimes they're like, I don't know if kids can do that, right? You're asking a lot of kids, and so we have to address beliefs and attitudes. Professional capacity is, I don't even know yet how to do that, so we have to build that capacity. And we have to bring into to bear the psychological capacity too, like the well-being of our folks. We had this weird thing happen with COVID. There was suddenly quite a bit of money to support learning, but we were all coming out of this space of dysregulation. And so while we finally had some resources to support professional capacity building, our teachers, families, kids were in this space of not really primed to learn, right? So this individual level is really important. Outside of that, all of our people that are working with kids are working in schools. And so we have to think about what happens at the school. What's the school culture like? What's the collective expertise of everybody in the school? So we have to do work at the school level in order to get those high yield practices happening with consistency and accuracy. Turns out, by the way, you actually do need a district in order for your schools to do this well. So there's also another level of the problem, right? Do we have policies that support our staff members in the work that we need them to do in the right way? Do we have sponsorship, which is why we're spending time with you today in a study session? This is really, I think, great, powerful work that you're engaging in. And so we want you to know about it so that you can continue to sponsor it. So long story short, we say that what we're trying to do is create, sustain a system in which people consistently and accurately do the best they can for all students. So we want to get better at creating this kind of system. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess maybe we'll get this later. How do you define what best someone can do is, and then measure to that standard?
It's a great question. And that's the interplay between, we kind of have a history in education of saying, oh, look, this works. These 5 things work. And we tell teachers, you need to do these 5 things every day. But we never actually teach them how to do those 5 things. We tell them about them, but we don't actually provide the support, right? And then we don't go check to see if they are and provide additional support for those folks that need it. So the best they can is on us. Like, we have to build a system that makes sure. I'm glad you gravitated toward that.
Yeah.
That's part of where we have kind of fallen down in the past. Next layer of this is that big system is a complex system that needs to be created, and we say that it takes a team to do this work, and we want teams at every level. So we want our teachers meeting and working with each other as they're trying out these high yield practices. The best PD for teachers is actually themselves working with each other, trying something, coming back, talking about what worked, what can be improved. So we talk about them working the problem at the classroom level. And then we need groups working the problem at the school level. We call those building implementation teams or school leadership teams. We'll talk about how we're going to bring them on next. The district implementation team is that next circle. And so we talk as a district so that we're solving problems in that outer ring. And then there is this next circle that is the district executive team, which also includes you. And it's on purpose that color matches the student outcomes color, because we talk about from the boardroom to the classroom. And it's all got to be aligned, and we have to be working the problem at every level. So this is what we're trying to do. We're just starting in on that effort. And the conversation about teaching and learning sits right smack in the middle.
I have a question. If maybe you could say a little bit more about, excuse me, how do I say this? Why it's so effective for teachers to work together in that professional development. You know, we've invested a chunk of time every Wednesday to give our teachers that professional development. And when we're in challenging financial times, the question will come up, how important is that? Can you speak to why that collaboration is so essential?
Yeah, so here's the history, right? Think about how you have learned to ride a bike. You learned to ride a bike on the bike, right? There was no distance between what you were learning and what you were trying. It was simultaneous. And in education, we more have the model where we show you a PowerPoint in the kitchen, and then a few weeks later, we tell you to go out and try that on the bike, right? And so we've got to close the gap between the learning and the trying. And that's what PLCs help us do. We get clear about what we want to be trying in your PLCs. And your PLCs are also problem solving what you should be trying, what's high yield. But then between that PLC and the next PLC, you're trying. You're going out and you're making a commitment to the folks in your PLC. Let's go try this, see how it worked, right? And then coming back and adjusting and trying again. So that mechanism, and when you compare it with coaching so that somebody's actually in a classroom, like holding the back of the seat while they're doing it, that's when you get your best effect. But if you remove both of those things from the equation, you do not get application. You get people knowing some stuff, but it does not change practice. So it's huge. Yeah.
Do you think there's just like maybe a psychological factor of you've seen with your work, colleagues and peers do this thing and they're excited about it and they have the credibility to convince you and persuade you more than anyone that, hey, this is working.
do you know what I mean? It's one thing to watch a PowerPoint or read a book. You go, well, I don't know if that'd work with my students, right? But when you hear your colleague that you have coffee with every morning and you know their students will it and they're saying, hey, this is what I'm doing. Do you think that that has a piece to do with it?
I know it does. In fact, with your leadership team, we dug into that, and it's called the social proof theory. And people are more likely to modify their behavior based on the behaviors of a near neighbor versus somebody across the world, right? And so when you see your near neighbor doing something and it's working, then you're more likely to kind of examine your own behavior and take a shot at it. So it can also be that you got one PLC that's really not making a lot of progress. They're struggling to try to figure out what, and then all of a sudden this PLC does something and it just pops. And then you scale that. You're like, okay, across all of our PLCs, let's all try this. And that really is how you create that momentum for change that is applied change. So you're spot on. Whether you knew that was the name for it, yes.
I've seen it in action, but I hadn't actually heard that theory. But yeah, I think that getting motivated by your peers and your colleagues is also better for morale.
Yeah.
Than other approaches.
Yeah. And when you start to do things that work, it actually makes your job a lot easier.
And enjoyable.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna keep clicking through here. So just kind of a reminder, this is what we're trying to do. The system is so important in this work. You don't get to watch this video, but here's the essence of the video. That the Learning Policy Institute down in Stanford has been doing a lot of research around the science of learning and development and really digging into what's going on with children's brains. And there's lots of research about uneven brain development and that being caused by adversity. And so part of getting better is understanding our kids, who's showing up in our classrooms every day, because we need to know that in order to know what's going to be high yield for them. So we had to dig into this. So when we talk about kids experiencing adversity, that's the adverse childhood experiences. And there are, you can see that there are factors that if you experience these things when you're growing up as a child, they impact brain development and they impact social and health factors in later life too, right? So if you experience emotional neglect, verbal abuse, physical abuse in the home, that has an impact on you. The research basically stops counting after 4. So if you're working with the child, once you get to 4, the impacts are so great and the causation later in life and impact on the brain is so clear, you can stop counting, right? So it impacts stress response, emotional regulation, learning and memory, and then the actual brain structure. And this is where we talk about that uneven brain development. So we've been learning about this. And this is some of the work that we did on the 14th with your staff, which, by the way, Bridget says, hey, do you want to come do some work on social emotional learning, executive function with our staff? I'm like, great. She says, yeah, it's a half day, it's a Friday, and it's Valentine's Day. Like, what? Nobody learns during that time. Right? Your staff was incredible. I was so impressed with how engaged they were. Like, it was, I think we could still be there. It would. So, but this is some of the stuff that we talked about. So I think this is really important for us to know as school system leaders. When we're talking about executive function and brain development, that age 3 to 5 is a really critical range, even though we continue to grow our executive function through the age of 30. But it means that we've got to pay attention to what's happening to our kids age 3 to 5, because that tells us a lot about how they're showing up in our space and how we need to be ready for them, right? Parents are the ones that determine the experiences and the relationships that develop or impact the development of executive function. So we got to kind of wonder about our parents. there's research out there that kind of actually gives me a stomachache. Starting in about 2009-10, we had our kids stopped playing with each other in person, and they started spending more time on social media. And so they were developing these social relationships and depleting their in-person relationships.
Recently ago. It
Yeah,
just seems like yesterday, but yeah.
yeah. So it's interesting. Some of the researchers are pointing to the front-facing camera coming on board around 2010 and how it completely changed the social media experience. The bummer here is that red rope is also rates of depression. It's also rates of self-harm. It's also rates of attempted suicide. And so our kids are struggling. Those kids, 2009 to 2017, are actually the parents of our elementary school kids. So we know we've already got a bunch of kids that have an adult in the home that's struggling with mental health issues. So there's a bunch of our kids that already have one ACE, right? Then we layer on top of that this technology continues to be pretty pervasive, and it can be a good thing, and when overused, it can actually cause physical and emotional detachment. It's overused. 87% of children had screen time exceeding recommendations. Children were more likely to be in the highest percentile of screen time if their parent only had a high school diploma or equivalent. You can see if you add twins to the mix, screen time
This
goes
time
up.
twins here.
Yeah, I don't blame you. Come on. So this is an issue for sure, and it means then we could potentially be up to 3 where we have kids experiencing some emotional and physical neglect.
Please care.
Yeah, that's.
I hadn't thought of that one. That makes an awful lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So there's also this research that's becoming more and more refined and duplicated, that the more screen time that kids are having early on, they're developing autism-like symptoms. So it's not autism, but the impact on their language development and their social skills is so great because they're not getting that face-to-face time. So more and more of our kids are coming with ASD-like symptoms. We just have to pay attention to that's who's coming through the door now. And not all kids, but there's a greater likelihood. There's also this too. This is a huge body of research. This was like 30,000 households or something like that, that indicated that if you're from a lower income family, you're more likely to experience housing instability, food instability, economic hardship, all of that. And that instability causes stress. And so the likelihood that you can add 1 or 2 more adverse childhood experience is quite high. So now I'm in a single parent household, right? Now we're over 4, right? And so now we know we've got impacts on brain development. And let's add this. So those other stats had to do with uneven brain development. Now we're having more and more births that where we're seeing neurodivergence. So we have a doubling over time across years of increased prevalence of ADHD. In 2000, we had 1 in 150 children identified with autism. Now we're 1 in 36. Part of it has to do with better identification, but part of it has to do with increased prevalence. And then that increased prevalence.
What's the other thing besides identification? Just prevalence.
Yeah.
But not a causative factor with that.
Not yet.
Okay.
Yeah, there's still all kinds of research out there trying to figure that out. And you can see the Down syndrome. We've always been able to identify Down syndrome, right? And so, but we're seeing increased rates there. And part of that, the causation there they're talking about is the older you are as a mother in childbirth. And so there may be some connective tissue there with other neurodivergence. But all this to say, there's more neurodivergence coming into our classrooms too. So we're saying to our leaders, look, how we used to teach kids that used to show up isn't going to work for the kids that are showing up now. Right? Kids are different than when I started teaching 25 plus years ago. So how do we create a system that works for the kids that are showing up now? That's really been part of the effort. All of that feels like a gut punch, but that same video I didn't get to show you says we can be really actually optimistic about this. If we pay attention to the research, we can do this. And it's within our locus of control. We can create the kind of stimulus that drives integration in the brain and has positive impact on that uneven brain development. That's the work that we're trying to get ourselves to prepare to lead in the system. Here it is. When we combine social, emotional, affective, and cognitive development together, we're creating many more interconnections in the brain. We accelerate learning and development. We accelerate the uneven brain development or the delayed brain development in so many different areas. So we have to lean into this, right? Over the past 2 years, when I was out doing work, I would be in a school district and we got the social emotional thing down. And I'd be like, really, what's that look like? And I said, well, we do a 20-minute advisory once a week. I'm like, no, you don't. Right? It has to be integrated. We have to be concurrently paying attention to these things all of the time. And it's because of how people learn. So quick, kind of how people learn. You don't learn down here. If you don't have food, rest, psychological or physical safety, you're in your survival brain. You can't even access your learning brain. If you can get past that, now you're working your way into your learning brain. And the first thing we have to do is we have to get that brain to focus and engage on the thing that we want it to engage in. Then we have to help that brain take in information, make sense of it. Then we go through this process of demonstrating and talking about what we think we're making sense of in order to figure out if we're getting close or we're still far away from that skill or that thing we're supposed to know. After we do that, we make some judgments about like, oh, I'm still far away. I need to try something else. Or I'm getting closer if I do this one thing, at strategizing. So getting up into the prefrontal cortex. Learning happens right there. So I try to make sense of this thing I just took in. I give it a shot and I fail. But I know I can try this next little thing. So I go back and I make some more sense making, right? I try again, didn't quite get it, go back, do some more sense making. Athletes are doing this in real time. Skateboarders doing this in real time. Kids, we're all doing it. You're doing it right now. If we make you do the communication and demonstration part publicly, which we often do in classrooms, if you are not in a place of high belonging, where you can be vulnerable and take risks and fail, you will quit that triangle, right? And so that belonging piece is also really, really, really critical. And that's part of what we talked about on Friday as well. So you can see how it's interconnected, right? I might have the best lesson plan ever, but if I'm a jerk, kids are not going to come with me at all. Even if I do the best 20-minute advisory for SEL once a week, right? So that this is what we all need to be aware of and understand as we're creating a learning experience for all kids.
That explains when I visit classrooms and the best classrooms I visit, I get the sense that they're a learning family, that everyone cares for each other. And that kind of your diagram there kind of demonstrates that.
You basically just defined belonging. So yeah. Yep. Okay, moving on. These are the three different networks of the brain: the affective network, the representation network, where we take information in, and then the strategic action expression network, where we do stuff and make adjustments to it. All right. So I bring those colors up because they are important later. Here's the thing that we're trying to get ourselves to get really good at is integrated teaching, where all of our classrooms are high care, high predictability, high yield classrooms all the time. Now we're just getting ourselves learning about this and what that means, but we have to have supportive, trusting classrooms that are, as Russ says, communities, right, where there's high belonging. Kids feel safe in there. They're part of that community. They get to decide what happens in that community and how everybody should feel. Within that community, there are clear routines. It's structured. I know how to operate in that space. I know what it's going to be like when I come through the door, how I'm going to be treated, right? And then it needs to be high yield. We need to engage in learning experiences, learning activities that actually like create sticky learning. I show this to folks sometimes is, okay, you've got this teacher and they do an amazing job. They create a classroom community charter that articulates how they're going to treat each other. They teach it to each other. They create it together. They reteach it to each other. They live it, right? The teacher also incorporates consistent routines for entering and leaving the classroom, transitions, for discussions, for grouping, for managing behavior, self-managing your behavior. We're winning, right? And then the teacher asks the students to quietly and independently complete a fill-in-the-blank worksheet. It's above the reading level of much of the class and contains vocabulary unfamiliar to many of the kids. We just went from highly effective, and it is a multiplication equation. As soon as any one of those things is a zero, the whole thing is a zero. So we have to do this thing called integrated teaching. And this is really where we're trying to build deep understanding so we can lead for this. This is making sense to folks?
Yeah.
Okay. You saw this already. This is where it sits in that framework. And so when we think about behavioral health usually has to do with my mental health, my ability to control impulse, and those executive function pieces that allow me to have self-awareness and inhibition. And so all of the trauma-informed research tells us we need predictability for that. And so that's where that behavioral health piece is. Sometimes behavioral health, when you get up into tier 2 and tier 3, is really therapeutic counseling, because I have such deep anxiety that I don't know how to control that, and I need some work on that. But if we do that therapeutic counseling, we make progress, and then we throw you back into a chaotic classroom environment, it's not going to work for you, right?
When behavioral health is upset, and I've seen that visiting classrooms where one child is taking all the time of the whole classroom.
Yeah.
No, they lack that.
Yep.
Self-regulation or whatever.
Yeah. And sometimes that is on us, right? And sometimes as teachers, we don't have the proper routines and scaffolds in place. And sometimes what the child is bringing to the situation requires all hands on deck. And sometimes it actually does require a separate setting while I'm building those skills so that I can rejoin my classroom community. And Ian has been a part of this conversation and was, on board and understanding and thinking about what does this mean for his leadership as well. Okay, I'm still going because I don't want to pay you guys too much. So coming back to this center, the high yield practice, and really trying to say, okay, what works? This is what we're trying to teach ourselves over the course of the rest of the year in order to set ourselves up to do work with staff. What I'm showing you here is a smattering of the best research that's out there around education. And so there's this guy named John Hattie. He happens to be Australian, and he does the research of the research. And so over 300 million students involved in over 1,600 now bodies of research. And he looks at them all, and then he creates something called an effect size. And it's the likelihood that this is going to accelerate learning. Anything above a 0.40 effect size accelerates learning. Anything between 4 and 2 is, I can kind of actually learn that on my own. 0 to 2, flatline, anything out below that is negative, right? And so we've put together and said, you know what, there are some things, these should be our starting place. And so when you think about the bottom and working up, if I'm coming into a classroom that has the routines in place, the teacher understands how to support me, even if I have some disruptive behavior, then it's really clear what we're going to be working on. I can focus and tend to that thing because I know what it is we're trying to figure out. Then the teacher provides me with information in the way that I can take it in. And that's what that Piaget and levels of development is. Like the thing you're asking me to do and understand is in my stretch zone. It's right there. It's not a million miles away. So when you hand me the handout to read, you're thinking about my reading level and you're giving it to me kind of as a +1. Yeah, am I going to learn some new vocabulary? Yes, but is it all new vocabulary? No, right? And then there's the triangle, right? I'm engaged in collaborative sense making and productive struggle. I try things out, then I reflect and strategize, I come back, engage in some more struggle. Those color codes align with the networks of the brain. So there is a framework out there, the Universal Design for Learning Guidelines, which is a problem-solving tool for teachers that we really want them to have it in their hands when they're in their PLCs. Because this is where you can think about which kids are going to struggle to access the learning. What kind of support are they going to need in order to learn, right? Though the colors represent the 3 networks of the brain, the affective, the how I take information in, and then how I demonstrate and strategize. That's your learning zone, right? That's the triangle that I need to be in. Some kids come to us and they need very little support to get into that triangle. They have all kinds of social capital. They've had all kinds of experiences and relationships that allow them to immediately move into knowledge building. They have the language. They are not afraid to demonstrate and fail and then replan, come back over, build more knowledge, right?
On the optimized relevance, which is in the upper level, what are things that effective teachers do to get kids to care about what they're learning? Let's say it's algebra, like how do they go about making that relevant in a way that they're interested in learning it?
So you basically have two buckets that you can operate in that. And one of them is, I know you well enough that I know what your background is, I know what your experience is. And so then I'm going to tap into what I know that you're interested in. So when we start digging into the math, we're going to use that heavy large animal farm scale. We're going to use examples that relate to, livestock and that kind of thing. The other bucket is what we call energizing a state of wanting to know more. And that requires novelty, curiosity, suspense, asking the right question, right? And so we have this history of kids coming in, and at best we say, this is what we're going to learn today. We're going to learn about this. Whereas if they came in and we were like, why on earth does the guy skiing up at Mount Baker have a beard that freezes? It's like 28. But the polar bear, when it's 0, that fur doesn't freeze. How come? Right? We got a completely different kind of learner, right? Even if we have to describe, they've never seen a polar bear in their life, right? We use the picture, we have them kind of, and then they're ready to Now you're wondering, aren't you? See, there we go. But,
Yeah.
so the thing I like about your question is that's what I want our teachers asking in their PLCs, right? So what does that mean? How do we get to relevance? And so some kids need us to do some work in that affective domain and making sure that they're feeling this sense of, oh, this is a classroom where we get to play with ideas, and it's going to connect to me. It's going to feel like authentic learning and problem solving we're trying to do. All kids need that collaboration and interdependence, because it's that collective sense making where you really do your learning. Let's say we nail that, and we've got kids that are a part of the community, they're dialed in, they're kind of pumped to figure out why the liver fur doesn't freeze. And then we shift over and we say, okay, let's look at this. Let's all read this article. If it's one article and that article is above your level, you're in trouble, right? So now you have to start thinking about what are different ways that I can present this information? What are some different options? It used to be super hard to do UDL before technology. Now, holy cow. I mean, you can change the reading level of something almost immediately. You don't even have to go look for a video. You can now create the video, right? That has them. So that's important. And then thinking about what's the new language, what's the new symbols, and thinking about your math question. We've got to pre-teach the new symbols and the new language, because math is a crazy hard language to figure out. And if I don't have those things, I can't engage in that triangle. And then the last thing is thinking about what are the tools that I need in order to interact with this information, in order to interact with my peers, and to be able to express and communicate. One of my sons has dysgraphia, and his handwriting is about the 4th grade level. It would take him forever to communicate that way. So you got to give him another way, and then you'll be amazed at what he can tell you, right? So this, we're trying to teach ourselves. In fact, that's our March 5th session. We're really digging into this so that we can be ready to roll it out to the rest of the system. So that's why the color coding's there, right? Turns out, yeah, the stuff that actually works because it's works inside the brain, right? So this is sort of that melding of the neuroscience and the field science. So high yield practice. How do we make this stuff happen with consistency and accuracy, right? And how do we make it happen in a way that works for our kids, so that we're using a tool that lets us think about our learners that are in front of us and the changes and modifications we need to make so that everybody can be a learner in that setting. That's what we're doing. Big picture, we're starting with the leaders this year, really trying to dig deep, develop our own kind of conceptual understanding, but then also begin to move into what's leadership look like behind this? How do we roll this out? How do we do this in a systemic way? Multi-tiered system of support, the system, and UDL are not programs. They're not initiatives. They are research-based frameworks.
What's UDL again?
Universal Design for Learning. That's this guy right here.
Right.
Yeah. So then we're doing some kind of signaling to school teams that this is coming. We really want to focus on the school teams starting to problem solve this next year and lead learners. So that social proof theory, you get a few people that are like fired up and ready and willing, get them trying it, they become the near neighbor, and then really going all staff the following year, so that we have time to actually build capacity, right? And get people moving in this direction. I think your process here is brilliant. I think the work that you guys are doing is so spot on. We're actually mirroring a lot of this for a 4-part series we're doing this spring down at the ESD for other districts. So kudos, keep sponsoring it. I mean, it is the right work and the right way to do it.
The center is that place that I've always felt where learning takes place, having that capacity to learn first. And that seems, everything is directed in that direction.
Yes,
I
yeah.
really appreciate the explanation and the direction that you're taking.
Thank you.
Because I think, you know, we can look at test score, we can look at this, we can look at that, and if we, without that underlying system, you're just nibbling at the edges.
That is a great way to say it.
It's like, you know, you've got engine trouble, but you're putting on wax and polishing the car.
We actually used that analogy at our first day of the 4-part.
I didn't hear that before, I just heard it now.
We do, like, the engine is the high yield practice and knowing whether or not it's firing with consistency and accuracy. And we don't do a great job of checking to see. We'll do PD and we won't even go check to see if anybody's trying anything, right? So with that implementation fidelity is kind of that term of saying, and go check. Because we can't make any judgments about whether or not it's having impact on student outcomes unless we know we're actually doing something. So that.
Well, it's based on the actual children you have, not theoretical children that you think you might want to have or hope that you have. And that's the only place we can start from.
Or who children have historically been.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. I couldn't be the teacher I was when I started.
No.
No. Well, you wouldn't want me to either. That first year was. That's what's, yeah.
The students are different. You could be doing the same and say, well, I've always done this and it's always worked. But those students, the way that they grow up and the context that they're in shifts, and then their needs shift with it.
Yeah. That cell phone, and the social media piece, the issue is something called upward social comparison. And whenever you engage in upward social comparison, which is that near neighbor that's above you, that you think you want to be, it only has a negative impact on your sense of self and your inherent self-worth. And so the more you engage in upward social comparison, the more damage you do to yourself. And kids are doing it all the time. It's like 24/7. And I showed you the research and the effect size in the 0.40 and higher. The most recent body of research out around cell phones, if they are in the classroom, it is a negative 0.25 effect size. Because you're battling it. Right? That first part of the learning brain where you want kids to engage and focus, you're going to lose every time to TikTok or whatever. So yeah, that has to be addressed as part of this work too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, and this is the work that principals have been doing all year. And Troy and a team of junior high teachers are going to that series. So it's being reinforced in many different ways. And that's significant for our middle level learners that are moving up the grade levels.
And Eric and the team went last year or earlier this year?
Erica and Ian and I went last year.
Okay, that's right.
And so it's the right work. It's the most important work that we can be investing in right now.
Well, I really appreciate you going through the detail here so we can, you know, that this is the kind of thing the board really needs to know in order to help support our directions and provide that continuity over time.
I appreciate the models. You know, there's a lot of different models here related to understanding how students learn, what affects learning. You know, that's, to me, scientific. You know, I'd expect that. I guess one of the things I struggle with is we don't, as a board, we don't often talk about what acceptable levels are for, being at grade level for reading and math and things like that. So I just feel like we got to connect the theory to those types of things and have an agreement on where we should be and how effective the models and the theories are at helping us to improve those things, which to me are kind of the output of the measurable output of the education.
Right, and that's that data-based decision making, right? So
Right.
looking at student results and then being able to understand what is that telling us? What else do we need to do? When we look at the UDL framework, are there some of those hot spots within there that we can be supporting our schools with in a different way?
Right.
And I think you'll begin to see that next year with the school improvement plans as well. We've done the tour this year with those SIPs, and we know that there's been a variety, but those
Right.
have continued to be rich conversations about, okay, even right now with our admin team, like, how do we take the work that we're doing and put that into a goal on our school improvement plans? So then everything is connected, and not just at the school, but across the district.
Do you have a sense of, let's say a district is just starting to learn about UDL, how long before you would start to see results in your student outcomes data?
5 to 7 at the earliest.
5 to 7 years at the earliest. Okay, so we're just starting this process. So we at the board level aren't going to be seeing UDL driven shifts for 5 to 7 years, potentially.
Potentially, yeah, and really, I mean, you can beat that timeline
Sure.
by resourcing it and really
Focusing in on
really
that.
focusing in on it. Yeah. One of the cheesy things I've been saying to your leaders is if you want to move from good to great, you have to fall in love with data that you hate. And so, like, look at who's not being served currently, like in your school or in your
Constantly
Yeah.
checking.
and have those conversations and don't like beat yourself up over it. Just say, but then the part of the ice cube model of change is you're going to do a lot of work between 0 and 32. And it's going to be, you're going to be changing environments, you're going to be changing beliefs, you're going to be slowly changing practice, and it's not going to melt, but then it will, right? And then you'll start seeing some real shift. So from a board perspective, what I always think is ask for the implementation data. Who's doing what frequency? How often are our PLCs meeting? Who's been trained so far? Who hasn't been trained? And if you get a lead learner group, have them come and talk to the board about what it's feeling like to do this work and really lean into that data first. It doesn't mean that you're not still looking at that outcome data, right? Because you want to live that every day, but eventually we'll see.
But some intermediary data before that student impact. Sort of like when you're working out, like you're checking mid-range sort of, right? Like, oh, I can go a little bit faster, or my heart rate's a little low this time, but maybe I haven't met my bigger long-term goal yet.
Yeah, and talk about a goal that's 5 to 7 years away. It's got to be broken down in chunks, otherwise.
We can't wait 5 to 7
Can't
years
wait.
to see if it's.
Yeah, you don't want to lose a sense of urgency around. Well,
And I would say from our Friday session on SEL, there is the momentum and the investment by our teachers.
Mhm. Yeah, we're not starting from zero. We've been doing the SEL part for that 5 to 7 years. And so that, and then the classroom expectations we've had to some degree for some time, and a system for checking in on those, whether, making I don't know, you're better judge than I am of how systematic we are with those.
And that's why that investment in our building leaders as a group is really going to be where we see that payoff. We're gonna see that impact because they're learning together, having expectations from, executive board as to what that looks like. And that connecting, that direct connecting to student experience and
Yeah.
progress. So it's an exciting time, honestly, to see that some things are coming to fruition. So I think, Ed, probably, 5 to 7 years is that reality check, but I think where our district is right now, that could be on the lower end of that, where we're seeing improved student outcomes.
And I think J curve, right? It's not gonna be linear growth over time, so it's gonna be incremental to begin with, and then it's gonna pop, right? We talk about the collective school experience. You can't have these pockets of excellence, and teacher to teacher to teacher has to be consistent and accurate in order for us to get the kids we need to get, right? And the other cheesy thing I say to the leaders is we're playing the long game in a short game world. And the short game world is you, as much as anybody, feel that tension from your neighbors. Like, come on, you've been on the board 6 months. How come the reading scores aren't through the roof, right? But everybody down the line feels that too. It's like, okay, we're gonna commit to this thing.
When you say like a J curve, are we talking about reading scores and those types of things, or did you have another metric?
Those,
Yeah, okay.
your smart balance scores, your reading scores,
Okay.
And some of the, that's what we're held accountable to, right? I mean, we've got to get our kids proficient in those academic proficiencies. We also do have social emotional benchmarks. And those are some of the things that we want to teach, because you can be smart as a whip, and if you don't have those soft skills to go with it. Man, I think about these kids that presented, you talk about soft skills, that's what we're after. Yeah. So we can and should measure that sense of belonging and how kids are feeling about school and how purposeful it feels or doesn't feel. Those are important metrics. But we want those to improve so that we can improve their proficiencies, really. So, yeah.
Yeah, one of the kids who presented told us at an earlier meeting, she was ready to drop out in 9th grade. And teacher-student connection brought her through.
That's huge. The other thing that we haven't dug into it here yet, but when we think about that learning experience and what's going on in that learning, is it accessible to me? Do I find it relevant and purposeful? That classroom learning experience needs to sit within a school experience where I feel like a member of a community, because then I'm more likely to show up. I'm more likely to engage as a learner within the classroom. And so when I see the FFA things happening, all of your extracurriculars, I prefer to call them co-curricular, because you can't live without them. They help kids to be a part of your school community, and then they lean in differently as a learner within a classroom community. Kind of nice to have the FFA kids remind us of that.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
I think I doubled your pay. That was
That's awesome, Bridget.
We triple it every year.
Yeah.
You know the equation with a 0 in it?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're up to 3 times 0 this year already.
How long you been at this? You're probably rich by now.
Oh, yeah, I am rich, but not, no.
Rich
It's-
experience.
Yeah, 25 years. You can check up on there everybody's time
Wow.
service that's.
Thank you.
So next time you see one of our principals, check in on this. There's
Yeah,
excitement.
that's been the fun part about this. I had a solid conversation with Matt Durand about this very work today. So that's nice when that's when it's starting to live, is when it's beyond the 90 minutes once a month we have with Casey. it's those conversations that are occurring, it's pretty encouraging.
So we wanna see the numbers of it spreading
Mhm.
in the coming year,
Mhm.
right? We've got our,
We have our
Leadership.
administrators, yeah,
Yeah.
and then the next, and we've already started talking and planning about that. How does that live in your school improvement plan? More importantly, how does that live within your leadership team in the same way across the
Mhm.
district? Just, like, understanding they're a little different, but again, we're all moving towards that same goal.
Mhm.
So that's
Keep the main thing the
happening.
main thing.
That's it.
Yeah.
I keep thinking of what Ed says, it's like we've got sort of this starting point, we need to have mid-range sort of as we're going, check-in and data to see that that's happening. But I would appreciate sort of a, let's aim for, even if it's this many years out, let's aim for, and if we hit that goal early, awesome. And I think our school improvement plans definitely do that. But I really loved what you said about looking at the data you hate. Because I think in education, there's been a long culture of using data, but cherry picking the favorable data as evidence to back up what we're doing, as opposed to holistically looking at all the data, the good and the bad.
And looking at performance versus growth.
Yes, and leaning in to some of those pain points without taking it personally, but saying, hey, this is an opportunity. So I appreciated your reflections on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Yeah.
Thanks, Susie.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
I'll come back anytime.
Next up, we have the finance report. So this, you want to start that up?
Yep, so this will be kind of a two-parter because, so this is the finance update for current finances where we are right now in 24-25. And then Brian will come up at the tail end to talk about budgeting for 25-26. Because as you recall from that budget calendar, there are still benchmarks through that as we go. So just knowing that right now we're kind of living in, it's that time of year we live in two worlds a little bit. So just a couple key things. Thanks, Casey. Transportation safety net, OSPI calculated that we were short over $500,000, but we applied for almost $500,000 and we received 120K, which is better than zero, but we have received it. So kudos to Brian and his team for getting that application in.
So their calculation is based on high cost individual students?
And unfunded parts of transportation, like more than just high cost, but like.
So the not, okay, just any of them, so not our individual student transportation.
Correct, yeah, yep. Brian and his team have met with PSE about the commercial strategic energy management, the CSEM program, which, we're doing some efficiency work anyway with our capital levy dollars. So partnering with PSE will get us some rebates. So some savings to the district for work we're already doing. So that's a positive thing to acknowledge. And then the auditor has been on site. So the annual audit started. Pretty good results so far. Obviously, we're not close to the finishing it yet, but the CFA is verified and the process is up to standard, which is something that we had some notes on prior. So some positives early on.
The auditor met with me on risk issues.
Great.
So I did complete that meeting.
Thanks. Thank you. Yeah, the way that works, Brian and I have a meeting with the auditor on risk issues, and then they also meet with board president. So that was done this week. With the ongoing changes at the federal level and just the dynamics there, we've had some requests, curiosity about impacts on our budgets. We haven't seen any impacts on our budgets with things that have changed, but people are just curious about what percentage of our budget is from the federal level. So if you see that gray piece is $3 million, so roughly a little under 10% of our budget.
is Washington State, are we on the low end compared to other states or the high end or?
We're on well, I guess the number I hear a lot coming out of Superintendent Reichdahl's office is that number being low based on what we pay in. That we're one of the states that pays far more than we get back in federal. So yeah, I'd say using that metric, we're on the lower end, I would say, relative to what we pay in to federal taxes.
Well, I think though that if you just, that's the gray part, but the state component, the orange part, well, we are certainly short according to our state constitution, basic ed responsibility of the state. You can look at other states and they rely much more heavily on local property taxes than we do. And that creates a great differential in the quality of education district to district, depending on the wealth of that particular community. So I think we are ahead of some other states in terms of that part of it. But I think we have to look at Washington State based on Washington State's constitution.
Yeah.
And not compare us to Alabama or something.
I'm just curious what would happen if that went away and we were able to keep those federal dollars, right? Like, would we be able to more than make up for that? That's just.
Which money then?
The federal.
If the federal money went away.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think maybe at another meeting, it would be useful to break the federal component down into its buckets because it is, and I think if so, because that is a question, and we don't know. I mean, hopefully there won't be any change, but if there is, at least it's good for us to be aware what those buckets are, what they fund, and what we wouldn't be able to do if we hadn't had. So the child nutrition is a big part of it, our title programs, but it's focused so you don't. It's not general ed money. It's focused on particular programs. So maybe at a future meeting you can break that down for us so that we can see that 3 million in its buckets.
Well, that would be the hard part is, I mean, even in those buckets, if those buckets go away, we're obligated to still carry out, thinking about title funds to support students who might need some intervention. A strong education system is still going to provide that support. So that's going to come from general ed money at that point.
Yeah,
So.
special ed funds, we're not going to give up our special ed program just because they're not.
Right, yeah.
Well, and it's legally required still,
Mhm.
and as it should be.
Yep,
Right?
yeah.
What I was gonna say, what's interesting is you're looking at this pie, it's like, okay, this is 100% of our funding source, but wouldn't it be interesting to add in a little sliver of the extra that we should be getting to be fully funded? Because that's that 100%, that circle sort of masks that.
Yeah, that's a good, unfunded component.
There should be an unfunded component there
Yeah.
to help us, but to give a better
No,
picture,
Yeah.
that's good.
right?
I try to not put ghost revenue in places and make that money. If you'd like me to start,
Very
it'll make my
smart,
job a lot
very smart.
I
easier.
say, I think that's how Enron closed.
We would need an additional slide.
It's clearly labeled.
Yeah.
Hypothetical. Maybe just a second slide with like
Funding.
needed additional, right? Because it does then shift the percentages relative to each other, right? If the state were meeting its obligations, then those other pieces of the pie would shrink proportionately.
Well, not necessarily. I think the blue
Well,
would
the
stay the
numbers-
same.
The numbers stay the
under
same,
our
but the
state law.
sizes get
The
smaller.
numbers stay the same, but the
Yeah.
percentage of the overall whole
Mhm.
related to each other shifts.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, I think what I'm hearing you say, if you look at that blue piece, when we ask voters to vote on the blue piece, we're looking at things like co-curricular activities. But right now, our blue piece is helping keep lights on, which is what the orange piece should be doing.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So relative.
We should have a little color there that's a mixture of blue and orange.
This one looks
taking notes?
great.
I got it.
But no, you
No,
did
this
what
isn't
Thank you, Bri-
criticism of the chart, it's just saying
Yeah.
how, when we're looking at funding by source.
This is, you did what I asked for, Brian, so thank you for that, because I wanted the board and the community to know just what our federal exposure is.
Am I correct in understanding that the solution for proper funding may be that they're gonna tell school districts that they can increase the amount that they're asking taxpayers for?
That is a current piece of legislation that is still alive. Brian and I have talked about that a little bit. I think it's obviously, I'll be curious to see how that piece of legislation goes because I have my own thoughts about it that I think, but I serve at the will of the board, so I'd be curious to hear what the board's thoughts are too. So, yes, that is a potential. Yeah, because, so what Ed's referring to is the potential of lifting the levy lid. However, that does, as, I guess I'm just gonna get into it. As good as that sounds, you have to go back out to voters to ask them for more money, which one big hesitation I have is that could be simultaneous with any state increases in property taxes. So it's then impacting our property owners more. The other risk too is if you don't pass that levy that time, then you lose the levy money you'd already budgeted because now you don't have a levy. Right?
Yeah, the problem with that is if the state uses the ability of local taxpayers to pick up what the state is not paying in basic ed, we're back into the same problem that led us to McCleary in the first place.
Yeah, exactly.
And what we need is a little more strict accounting that you know, the state's paying that basic ed part and we're paying the non-basic ed part.
And it disproportionately impacts a district like ours, where majority of our families qualify as low income. You're asking them to carry more of the burden that the state should be helping to support.
I mean, it would be one thing to think about it once, if the state paid their full share of basic ed. Then communities could decide, well, we want to go this way or that way. That'd be a different decision.
So even though we've already passed the levy, if that law were to change, we wanted to ask for more money, it would potentially lose the levy that we already have passed.
Because it would require another election. And I want to say for those that are watching and recording at home, we've had very great success with our levies. We pass at much higher rates than our neighbors do. So I appreciate that, but I do think it's important that we're mindful of the impact on our voters.
And we have been mindful with our levies to try and not put big increases.
Yeah.
I strongly suspect if we were granted extra authority now in this part of our 4-year levy cycle, we wouldn't take advantage of it until then. You know, we wouldn't even entertain taking advantage of it until we were ready to renew our levy again.
And that was my initial thought as well.
It just doesn't make sense. I think we need to keep hammering on the state paying their proper share.
They're just kicking the can.
To us.
They're kicking the can
Not down the
to
road.
local communities. That's.
And then
what that's
as Russ said, getting away from what the McCleary district tried to fix. So. Discussion for a different day. Quick look at our cash balances. I'll talk, we're gonna look a little bit closer at the general fund later on with the cash balance there because you know, our cash is sound there, but we have that, it's a pretty sizable loan in there in capital. So when we look at the fund balance later on, we'll look at the how close we're getting between those cash balances and the loan amount. Our January annual average FTE was at 1505, budgeted was 1479, so still over at that point. Look at the FTE comparison throughout the year. Orange was last year, and so we're a little bit below last year. You know, orange, we had a decrease coming up between February and March. We'll be curious to see how that impacts us this year, if those trends stay the same or where we'll be at.
We've been going kind of, was it 3% decline year over year in enrollment?
Yeah, but there's also tricky parts, like if you look in November, how we got above last year.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a note in the budget monitoring. Are we gonna go through that as well? Because there's a note about enrollment. So if we're gonna talk about this again, I can wait, but
What budget monitor, what did,
it was one of the attachments in the finance.
I think that's what Brian's gonna speak to.
That's Brian, okay,
Okay.
I'll wait.
revenue is the part of the total. So as we've talked about over and over, revenue does not come in a straight line. So sometimes the growth between the bars will be greater and sometimes it'll be small, shorter. Expenditure tracking is spot on for where we should be. Again, our revenue is, down, which is what we expected, but also knowing that there is we took the apportionment advance last year, which we did not take this year. So
then we'll expect this year to start exceeding last year.
Once
For the second half. Of the
yeah,
year.
once we hit that part when apportionment advance start getting paid back, you'll start to see it switch spots. But yep. And this is the one that obviously I always pause on for a little bit longer because this is the point of celebration, but also acknowledgement of the hard work.
Right.
And quite frankly, the word of sustainability, right? Where we are right now spending less than we did last year, despite the cost of everything being more.
Right.
And just an acknowledgement that's on the shoulders of a lot of all of our colleagues, and it's it changes the student experience, and which is why we work so hard to advocate with our legislators, because while we're proud that we're in a more sustainable spot, it's not sustainable over time. So again, this is almost 800K more expenditure than revenue this year. That is just, like you mentioned earlier, Ed, and we'll show here shortly, that's because expenditures are relatively a straight line. Revenues are not a straight line in public education. This bar shows that well, that our blue line will stay pretty stagnant the whole year, but that green line, and this is where actually we'll go to an example that Brian and I got from a colleague of ours, but so here's where you see the zoomed in difference, right, between the blue and the green. So as you look at our fund balance tracking throughout the year, again, that blue piece, it's had less of a dramatic fall because that was our apportionment advance, like you talked about, Ed. And then we won't see the dramatic fall that we saw in last year because we didn't take that this year. But as I mentioned in the beginning with our fund balance, where we start to look into getting to the zero spot or below zero, where we needed that capital loan. This is why we talk about fund balances between 8 and 5%, because that's what you need to sustain, because any school is going to go below zero. And this is the model that was shared with us when Brian and I presented a few weeks ago with WASBO, which is the Washington Association of School Business Officers. Brian and I were on a presentation, and the president of that group, who is the CFO at Oak Harbor Public Schools, presented, and she shared this great model with us, with everyone in attendance, and it really helped clarify. At least for me, and I think Brian appreciated it as well, which is why we're sharing it here, is that concept of, here's a district that started with $1 million in their fund balance and ended with $1 million in their fund balance. But even in the normal year, they still went negative, right? That's the debt they incurred because that's the way school funding works, and so let's say, so that's the example of an operating budget that would be slightly below ours because their target fund balance would be $1 million. But even with that, they're still falling, and that's going to be where you look at it side by side with ours, you start to see where we're getting into this spot right now, where you're seeing right here is where we are. So it's very likely that we're going to get below zero, not cash because we have that loan on the books from capital, but we're going to get, if not below, we're going to get real close to zero. And that's the unfortunate function of the way school revenue works. So,
Well, in that first example, if you were able to start at 1.5 and stay above zero,
Yes, you wanna move the whole thing up with the fund balance.
Yep, and then the issue, and this is the person who presented this also brought up a very good point, though. When you slide that whole thing up, that's when the state starts saying you don't need more money.
How do they do that?
Because they say, well, look, we look at we can see your bank account. Your fund balance is 8%. You're fine. Like,
Yeah, but the auditor is saying you should have a higher fund balance.
yeah.
But do they actually, would they actually pick on a specific school district? And
No, I just mean like, overall, like, let's say everyone had a fund balance of 10%. The state would say, no, you're fine. And then we'd still fall this spot where we have to make sure we have enough cash to make it through. Right. And then they would start to say, okay, your fund balance now is, since you're at 10%, that's too high. So we're going to decrease your funding. Then eventually we're going to fall back into where we are right now.
We used to keep money in transferable accounts that weren't in the operating budget. We had about 800 to 1,000 to 1 million in a school improvement account. We spent it bit by bit.
To me, the simple answer is to just make revenue normal. Just stop doing this with it, right? Stop making your revenue look like this. And that's how you solve the problem.
Just bring it in evenly throughout the year.
But they adjust for certain things, right? They adjust for local collections, right? They know that local levies pay in at 2 times of the year. They also want to make sure their books look as good, because their end of their fiscal year is different than ours. The end of their fiscal year is June 30, and ours is August 31. So that's why we get so much money after June 30, because they close their books and they look good. And so we get a bunch of our money when we have no kids. So yeah, I don't know. Not that I have an opinion on this or anything. So.
Burn it all down.
Any questions? All right, I'll transition to Brian then for the budget update for.
Something sticky on the table.
You see how much you love germs.
Okay. So I've got a handout for you. It's up there. Will you take it down for a moment, Nick?
Sure.
So at this point in the budget development process, which is what we're in, is what we're doing. This is the budget development process. What I took from your conversation last time about where you want to be with the fund balance is that there's not a lot of appetite to rush to 5%, which is the board policy, or over that, right? We want to gradually build back up, lessen the impact on kids, and get to where we need to be to meet our goals for the state. So what I've done is taken the 4-year forecast and forecast that number of 4% and where we need to get there. Looked at the budget today, right now, what are our revenues, what are our expenditures, and what's that gap, including the mandated increases based on our contracted bargaining agreements. So all that to say that at this point in February today, there are so many factors outlying in the budget that will start in September that this is not an actionable document, right? So this is a check-in, it's a talking point, it's a where are we, how are we doing? So when you see the numbers here, don't think, okay, we need to reduce by this number. And I just want to say that clearly for everybody, this is not an actionable document. It's a check-in on the process as we develop the budget, okay? Thanks.
You bet, yeah.
At the very top in italics, that's essentially what it says there, because I don't want this document to live without that disclaimer. So, adjusting our revenue from the budget, including some factors like increasing safety net enrollment being higher than we expected, reducing some of the federal funding that we don't expect to come in anymore, reducing all of the timber revenue except for what we've already received, which was we've received about $7,000. We budgeted for 150, which was probably the lowest we've ever budgeted. Adjusting for all those things, our new estimated revenue is just over $32.3 million. Expenditures, again, there's a lot of factors in there. Essentially what I did for our expenditure was take a snapshot of what we spent so far, remove our most major single cost, which is our interest payment, multiply everything by 2.4, put the interest back in, and then add the other half of the interest back in one more time. Adjusted a little bit for food service, took out 2 months of food service because we're not going to store the same amount of food in July and August, even June. That cost would be lower. I did not make adjustments to the transportation cost, so it's still in there as if we're still running buses and paying for diesel. Just because at some point you get to be, adjusting too much because you're trying to get to something that you really hope is there, but so I think both of these estimates are reasonable and conservative. We were budgeted to change the fund balance positive about $46,080. Currently, if everything ended the way that it looks exactly right now, which we know it won't, we would be actually building in $86,000. So we're beating our target by $40,000, which is a small change, but it's the right direction. Any questions so far? All right. So binding condition number 6 essentially sets a fund balance target for the end of this year. And I'm working with OSPI to do that now. I've reached out to the ESD and OSPI to say, at this point, where does OSPI want to set a condition? I'm talking about giving them some options. I'd rather they don't go for, this one that we have here because that's higher than we expected. We have a condition that says the budget has to be at least neutral, to not lose any more money, but not gain any either. So an option would just be to say fund balance has to be equal to or greater than last year. Or they could say you budgeted about 46,000, so add about 46,000. Do at or better than your budget. So we'll see where that goes. That line's blank right now because I don't expect to have to make any mid-year adjustments or prioritize any of our bills to get there. If we did, we have some options, but currently we don't. So
if we aim for a zero fund balance, wouldn't that just increase the amount of work we need to do later to meet
Yes.
the band goal?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes. So that would just be to meet our binding condition. If the state said, don't lose any money, your fund balance has to be, zero or $1 more than what you ended last year. That would just, because that's the condition that we negotiated with them.
Right.
They initially wanted us to already have budgeted for this school year to get to 5%. That was the first letter they gave us. And we backed them off of that for the benefit of our students.
Right.
Essentially, we told them we're losing 3% of our revenue in regionalization. 6, but 3% each year over time. We're losing our ESSER funds. Don't make us back out $5 million in 1 year. Let us stagger it. So the next binding condition set we have does have us going up to that 4% mark. And we do have to get there in the next budget that we make.
Right.
And that's the bottom line there. So using the 4-year forecast that we put together last year, if you take 4% of the expenditures in that, you get to almost $1.3 million. And that's where we need to budget to end. So
the 1.291.
Correct.
That next year. And does that still include the $1 million loan?
No.
Okay, when does that loan get paid off? Is that between 24, 25 and 25, 26 year or?
So the fund balance and the cash are separate.
Okay.
And the fund balance, none of this ever includes that loan.
So the fund balance assumes the debt already. So our cash is higher, but this fund balance knows that we have debt that we need to pay off. So it counts as a liability almost when you talk about the difference between cash and fund.
Okay.
Yep.
So the 1,027,000 has already taken into account the $1 million loan.
Yes. Yeah. It was never in this calculation.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's why if you go back to Nick's presentation, our fund balance is quite low right now. Our cash balance is high. And that's part of the planning that we did last year is how are we going to get through these tight times and still make payroll reasonably without taking out a loan that gives interest to somebody else, and that was the problem that we were working to solve.
I guess I'm wondering how we're getting to this fund balance of $1,027,000. If our change in fund balance is only 86,000.
Because the fund balance started around 900.
We started with a positive fund balance
We
this year.
started at 900.
Mhm.
941,000.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And then you're also adding in some of the things down here that are uncertain.
Correct. Yeah. So the number at the $1,027,347.60. That's if everything stays exactly on track for where it is now. That's where we would end. We need to get the $1,291,463.80. And the difference between those two, plus about 315,000, which is what I calculate to be the change based on the contracted agreements, is the number in the middle, which if we were to budget today, we would have to budget to reduce expenditure by $580,000. And that's why I want to be clear that this is not an actionable document, because there's still way too many factors to start taking action on that.
Why such a big reduction if we're only 250K away?
Because we have 315,000 extra expenditures coming on with the new bargaining agreements. Teachers moving up a step. IPD that's unfunded because the state funds their inflationary increase. The state funds that at, as I looked at it today, it was like 91 teachers at $82,000. We have 114 teachers, and the majority of them make more than that. So the state funded increase in inflation is only a partial funding of what we agreed to give. And what we agreed to give it because we think we should.
And that differential is the 315.
Yeah, and not just for the teachers, to be clear, that's for all staff.
Everybody.
Yeah, moving up steps, and contracted agreements. Does that help?
Yeah.
Clarify that? Yep. And that's again why I wanted that disclaimer on here to say it's not actionable, because this document is going to exist outside of our discussion.
Yeah, and and as this indicates, some things may turn out better than what your worst case scenario is. Some may turn out worse.
Correct. Yeah. So if you start looking into those factors, safety net, the last number that Director Linteman gave us was a little bit higher than what we estimated here. But we don't even receive confirmation that we're receiving those funds at that level until March. So right now it's high enough that I wouldn't consider it a conservative estimate. It's realistic, but it's still lower than what Director Linteman said it could be.
Safety net's a grant that we get?
Correct. Safety net is when we have children that have very high expenditures attached to them for their needs. We can apply for extra funding from the state to meet those needs. So an example, for example, in a neighboring district, recently I was told that they had one student costing them $900,000 because the student was placed in a residential facility in Arizona. So you pay for the student to be there, you pay for all of the costs associated with that. You also pay for the family to travel and visit the student and for the student to come home. And that's what the student needs, right? But the state doesn't fund special education like that. So then they backfill with safety net, essentially. And safety net, you can't even start claiming safety net until you get to over double the average expenditure per student. It's 2.2%, 2.2 times the average expenditure per student. So if a kid costs on average $20,000, you can't start claiming safety net until you get over 44. So even with that, there's a significant gap for each kid.
The way that we fund special ed is problematic
Correct.
because it puts the schools in position of.
The schools fund the need. The state gives a little bit extra per kid. And if the need is greater than that little bit extra per kid, then the schools still fund the need, whether it's $900,000 or, a kid who only needs speech services may, have that little extra, and that's great.
And the other piece here too, that this assumes this doesn't have any legislative action added into it. Which is important to note because I think I think there's been times where districts will budget based on what they hope they try to put together the budget too quickly with what they hope the outcome will be in Olympia by reading the tea leaves a little bit. But we're just in a spot where we have to wait till exactly we hear what the change is, if there's any.
Yeah, I think that's prudent because legislators that we talk with don't see adding to the education budget without adding to taxes. And there's a lot of, the government doesn't want to add to tax, I wouldn't count any chickens here. They probably all have bird flu anyway.
Yeah.
But
Just-
if they hatch, then we can make adjustments,
Correct.
like we
Yes.
did at the beginning of this year.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, and I'll give you an example about that, and then we'll talk the timeline, because the timeline is a little bit problematic for that as well. So House Bill 1338, we got an email about just this evening, I'd say. It came through, and that was a bill that was set to add $306 million statewide to MSOCs. And I calculated the effect for our district to be between $420,000 and $460,000, right? So that would be significant. And you see if this number, 580,000, was reduced by 420,000, that makes a significant difference, right? That bill is in committee, and there was a strike-through amendment that reduced the number from 306 million to 5.5. The impact on the district would then be $7,220.
So not even what they would pay for one student,
Correct.
half of what they would pay for one student.
Correct.
That's
Well,
almost
so
expensive.
with the strike through, it would get us down to 7,000?
Yeah, just over about 7,200.
Don't waste your ink.
They would want to save it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's why we're not budgeting on legislative action until it happens, because that was a bill that were, and there's still 2 other MSOC bills making their way through the process. So it's not dead, but that was one that, just this evening, we received word that there was that. And that strike through amendment hasn't been adopted yet. And I said, we're not budgeting on that.
That was House Bill.
1338.
Thank you.
Let's see.
What do you base your planning on staffing levels for next year on? Is this it?
So I'm working through the staffing plan with Pam, and if you refer to the budget calendar, there's a real closer look at the staffing in March. Because that's when we have, this month we reached out to all staff to see their intent to return. So we can make some of those determinations. And right now, our staffing determination, unfortunately, is not based on funding. It's based on what's the minimum we can do, which is where it's been before. And I feel that we are about at the bottom of that. This year, in fact, we worked a little bit to get some extra FTE back to both K3, where it's funded, and to the secondary campus, where they just simply didn't have places to put kids, and they still don't.
I thought we had to plan staffing to meet the binding condition requirement.
The binding conditions requirement are all fiscal, but the main portion of our funds are staff. Yeah, main portion of our expenditures are staff, over 87% of that expenditure is staff. And that's why there's that 315,000 that we would have to take out of our current expenditures to remain neutral.
And to remind you where Mr. Fraser started, that this is a snapshot of where we're at, because each month we go, that 579 number, as it changes one way or another, becomes more and more real each month we go.
Correct.
Because more information comes in.
There's fewer factors.
But
that
the
we have to
biggest,
look at.
the biggest piece, and I think Brian, you were talking about timeline a little bit. The biggest factor are the end of the legislative session relative to laws about notification of staff.
Would you like to just address that?
Sure, I mean,
Sure.
unless you wanted to. So the big issue, because if we, like you talked about staffing levels, there's laws around when you have to notify certificated staff about their status for next year. And that date is May 15th. The legislative session is looking to end April 27th. And so as we proceed, this 579 number will move one way or another, and hopefully it'll move in a direction that's favorable for us. But unless we know, because legislative session will end on the 27th, but OSPI still needs to do all their work with what those laws are and what that means for Mount Baker School District. So we won't know where this number is until pretty close to that May 15th deadline. And that's going to be where, if as we look at this and we get closer with things, that's where we start to talk about the reduced educational programming resolution that you've passed before. And that's just gonna be how we go through this as we look at our staffing level. And I don't know how that would, and even if there's folks that are choosing to not come back, if those are positions that like Brian said, I don't know if, we can afford to not have some people come back, even if they are choosing to leave on their own.
So in the last few years when we did this, people were very clear and the union was very clear. All of our people want to know early if there's going to be reductions.
Right.
And we have done our best to try to do that, and they've been happy with our timeline, but the timeline gets compressed to where there's not an opportunity for the board to pass a resolution for a reduced educational program between the end of the legislative session, OSPI's analysis of what it means for our funds, the governor signing it, and that May 15th deadline. So unfortunately for some of our people, that means that we may be issuing RIF notices and not having, we may end up in a season where we could hire more people instead of riffing, but we still have to issue the RIF notice to hit our mandated deadlines. And it's just,
I understand that. I guess the concern is what communication can happen upstream of that, so people aren't surprised or caught off guard. Because
yes. And we're working, we meet, every 2 weeks with our union leadership, and they're hearing this from us. The MBEA saw this today, and we talked through it with their leadership so they can continue to communicate, and they understand, and they will be our partners in communicating that to everybody. It's just the timeline. It's the deadlines. And I expect to burn a lot of midnight oil between April 27th and May 15th, but that doesn't mean that we won't maybe have to take some action because of some of those unknown variables in April before we know.
Is this year different from last year in terms of how close things are going to be?
Last year was a short session, so it was 30 days shorter in the legislature. So if they end on time, it's a 90-day session. And then the governor signs it and OSPI does their analysis. Last year, there was 30 extra days to do that.
Also, the other piece that's different too, again, this is a snapshot in time, but this 579 number, had we articulated this number at this time, the last 2 years, that number would have been far higher. So that's the other change too, that the reductions we made the last 2 years, are much higher than what, if any, we have to make this year, will be fewer than they were the last 2 years.
Would it be worth putting together a plan of how that would be achieved to communicate it earlier, just as a worst case scenario, similar to what you normally do, which is if you do need to riff, you do it ahead of time. Just trying to think about, this is worst case and it's 579 is like, what would be the plan to accomplish that? And
yeah, I wouldn't say that's worst case. This is just a moment in time. It can still get worse. If we lose all of our federal funding, then that number is 3,579,000.
Yeah.
Right. So I wouldn't say it's worst case. It's just a moment in time.
I think that's a good idea, but I think the time in which we can give a clearer picture is later than now. There's just too many balls in the air right now to do anything better than this.
Correct. I think at this time, these numbers are not actionable. Right. It's worth knowing about. And when I look at preparing the budget, I'm preparing it with these numbers in mind. But I don't think I think you're correct that eventually we're going to have to do that. Whether we use the plan or not, we're going to have to at some time cut off and say, okay, that's what we know. We need to make a plan, and we need to articulate that plan, and we need to tell the people involved or impacted by that plan. You're right. But we're just not there yet. That's April.
okay,
Yeah.
since you mentioned federal funding, I know it's pie in the sky, but if we're not getting the money that we get, would we get the money that we normally pay in?
Not necessarily.
The federal government will keep taking your money, they won't give
Yeah.
it back.
Well, they'll give it to other people.
Yeah, I mean, we've all paid our taxes for last year.
Yeah,
Right, that's where the money comes from, is from you and I.
right. We wouldn't. So,
They're just reprioritizing their spending if they choose to do that. They
Yeah.
would say, we're not going to give money to disadvantaged children who need education. We're going to give money to corporations because they'll provide jobs for those uneducated kids. They'd be reprioritizing their spending.
reprioritize. Okay, so we pay the money, but we wouldn't necessarily get anything back.
Correct.
Well, you're talking about the level of taxation per state versus the revenue or what?
Well, you said we pay a lot more money than we get back.
Well, yeah, because I mean, individual Washingtonians, like those are our federal tax dollars going over there.
Right.
So like us as an organization, we don't pay federal taxes.
Yeah, but the Washington State receives 84 cents in support from the federal government for every dollar we give.
Right.
So we're a donor state.
Yeah.
Don't.
And that's from all of us who, I mean, who've settled up their taxes for this year. You have to like before 15.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And that was just part of the agreement of having a federal government, is that when there's a hurricane that hits North Carolina, we all pitch in. Right?
It just so happens we're on the donor end for a long.
Well, wait till we have that earthquake.
Yeah, that's true.
But, you know, if you look at it within the state, King County pays a much greater share than the rest of the county, so it's, you know,
Yeah, right. So, you know,
this is good work. I think, you know, I think your caveat that, you know, take it with a whole pound of salt and is wise, but you're tracking all these variables. And so I think in your mind, you're sort of adding and subtracting as you go along. And this is a good snapshot of the today's adding and subtracting basically, but you know, we can keep working on enhancing any of these things, but this is the most reasonable estimate.
well, thank you. And for the record, it's more than just in my mind. So if I hit a deer.
Right, no, it's
a spreadsheet with.
yeah,
Nick understands,
it's based on figures,
Gotcha.
yeah.
I'm trying not to, but I don't know if my car could stand up to it, even a small one at this point. But thank you. I appreciate that.
What's
I
the,
use mind broadly because mind also includes what you have on paper.
Okay.
I do have a question about, you know, so we've got our board policy about, you know, trying to hit 5%, and maybe we won't hit 5% whenever we, right? But that, let's say we're aiming for 3% or 4%. Are we taking our ending fund balance and dividing that against what to get the overall percentage, our revenue or our expenditure?
The expenditure of the previous year.
Okay.
Yes, is what the policy states.
Thank
So what we expect to have in expenditures for this year will be, theoretically, per policy, we should get to 5% of that number for next year.
there's a note in here that there was a significant drop in enrollment in January.
Yeah, for a variety of reasons, the actual FTE went down by about 15. And that was similar to a drop we saw in March of last year. And so I reached out to the registrars to ask kind of what went on, and there were some families that moved out, and there were some high schoolers that haven't shown up in a while, and there was some, it was nothing. There wasn't a reporting anomaly, is what I found. There was a reason for all of it, and it just happened to all happen at once.
Okay.
So if that continues to happen, then we would have to adjust our enrollment estimate, which would adjust our revenue estimate for next year.
Right.
Yeah. So that's the factor of delay. It's one of the many, which is why, one of the many factors that plays in here.
So that's 1.2 number.
Mhm.
Is that 3%, 4%,
4%.
4%?
That's 4%. That's to meet the binding condition based on the discussion the board had at the prior board meeting. I didn't hear an appetite to immediately get to 8.5.
No, I think that's definitely,
And what percent did we start at? Fund balance?
This year we started at about 2.8. Yeah.
I'm just sort of thinking, like, what's a reasonable
Yeah.
yearly growth
Mhm.
Keep adding to it.
to keep adding to that fund balance?
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, a 5% policy is on the lower end of what works for cash flow. But also it's board policy. And so when we get there, we could look at, okay, we have our fund balance and now we can look at our educational program and decide which we want to build into. Yeah.
Okay. But this sort of puts us on target. If we kept this same kind of trajectory, we'd be at 4% by the end of next year, and we could theoretically, very theoretically, aim for 5% by the end of next year.
Yep. And 4% is what we renegotiated our binding conditions to be with OFBI. Again, they initially had us going to 5% in 1 year while we lost a bunch of revenue. And they were good partners in adjusting.
So basically, we meet OSPI's binding conditions by the end of next year, we hit board policy here. That
Yes,
seems reasonable.
that's what I gathered from the discussion. Okay. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Okay, of course,
Thank you, Brian.
of course.
so next up we have just our meeting schedule, and of course, our next meeting is an all-day meeting on March 8th, beginning at 8 a.m. And we will plan at this point for the public session of that to run till 3:20 p.m. And then with an executive session scheduled for 3:30 to 5:30 p.m. It may not take the full 2 hours, but I'm just saying that that's what our schedule is for that. So we'll
What was the date on that?
and the
Next Saturday.
Oh, yeah.
I expect the individual names of the semifinalists to be ready to announce probably midweek this week, this coming week. Mark Fenn will talk with each one and then get back to us probably by, I expect by Tuesday at least this week. And then we can release those names once we get confirmation from all of those individuals.
Okay.
And then, of course, our 11th, 12th, and 13th of March, which you have the schedules for that, so.
Did you guys determine on the 13th when the regular board meeting?
The
was?
regular board meeting will be 3 p.m.
Yeah, so I'll make
on March 13th. I asked and everyone's able to make that, so we'll do 3 p.m. here in the boardroom.
Okay.
We're not, Tammy, we don't have, there's not another meeting with any of the staff and the superintendent candidate in this room at that time, right?
No.
That starts at like after
They'll be
4.
out at elementaries or other
Okay.
buildings, so that's fine.
Right, so we're fine, we'll, I don't think, we don't need this room for any of it until the evening meeting with the public. So we'll be over before that because we'll be moving from our board meeting to dinner with the candidate at about 5 p.m. So we'll have to wrap up this. And then one of the things I wanted you to, Ed, as WIA rep for the board, would like to have guidance on particularly 2 of the proposed WIA amendments. So I want to set aside a little time to discuss those. Those have to do with changes to participation by gender. So we'll, and I think it's fair, and thank you for bringing that to the board, Ed, that your participation in that be based on guidance from the board, so.
That's on the 13th.
We'll set aside some time in our March 13th to cover that.
And that's happening on the 13th because you have to get back.
Yeah, we were gonna do it, remember, I think I talked about doing it the following meeting, because I didn't really want to take time while we're still in the middle of all this, superintendent search. However, you had the vote, WIA vote takes place, I believe, March 19th.
Right.
And so that just gives us, gives a few days for Ed to get be able to communicate with the representative of the representative.
Right. Regional rep.
Yeah, is that person a board member? Is that what they are?
I would assume so.
Yeah, because I think, like I said, like we talked about, I've talked to Ron, there's like so many layers of representatives here, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also will be emailing everyone about dates at work for a CTE visit. Hopefully, it's pretty crowded next couple of weeks, so
Yeah.
kick it out a little bit further now.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Looking
Yeah.
forward to that.
Yeah, good to see the pigs.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we're not gonna kiss them though.
Wear your boots.
So that's all I had for schedule. That's plenty to do, so.
Yeah, a lot.
But thank you. Thank you for all your time putting in on this valuable effort. So with that, we will adjourn.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave, for signing. We have no executive session.